The War of Spanish Succession had been waging for over a year, but major combat was rather limited. Prince Eugene's bold descent from the Alps had come to a stalemate of sorts after the sanguinary Battle of Villars that August, but in late 1702, the horizon broadened. To secure Flanders for Philip V of Spain, a 60,000-strong French army under Marshal Boufflers had seized the Dutch barrier fortresses in the region, all without a shot fired. The Dutch frontier was then entirely exposed to French aggression. To the Dutch, it was a fearful reminder of the Rampjaar, or disaster year, of 1672, when only by flooding their lands did they manage to halt the French. Fears were exacerbated when the electorate of Cologne aligned with France. However, the invasion soon guaranteed the intervention of British King William III of England, Ireland, and Scotland, who was also then stadtholder of the Netherlands. William, however, was an ailing man. A horse-riding accident resulted in his death on March 19th, which left Princess Anne to ascend the throne as queen. Louis hoped that without a stadtholder, the Dutch Republic would crumble in his hands. However, Anne firmly held on to William's foreign policy, opposed France, and come to the aid of her Dutch allies, who simultaneously rallied under Antony Heinsius, the Grand Pensionary of Holland. Flanders, a juncture for the major powers to meet and fight, would once more be a key battleground in the coming years. Of course, a war for the throne of Spain would need to be fought in Iberia. Portugal, led by King Pedro II, was then a reluctant ally of Louis XIV. Such loyalty would soon be tested. In August, an allied army and fleet landed at the principal Spanish naval base of Cadiz. Its seizure, it was hoped, would draw out the French fleet to give battle and bring Portugal to the new alliance. Initially, the Allies met little resistance. However, after Anglo-Dutch troops violently looted St. Mary, local resistance increased, Allied logistics stalled, and the expedition was called off after a month of little progress. The people of southern Spain would not be swayed to the banner of Charles III, nor would Portugal, not yet. This upset was then overshadowed when the Allies intercepted a Spanish treasure fleet at Vigo Bay on October 22nd. The escorting French squadron was nearly destroyed, although the treasure fleet made it to Spain largely intact. Another development took place in France itself at the worst time for Louis. Just 12 days after France officially entered the war, a Protestant revolt erupted in the Cevennes region in reaction to the persecutions committed under the Edict of Nantes. These peasant fighters took to calling themselves Camisard, and were led by the baker's apprentice, Jean Cavalier. Across 2 years, a guerrilla war took place, characterized by terror and devastation. The royal government responded in kind with terrible reprisals. It would take 30,000 troops and a succession of generals to quell the rebellion. But of all the opening fronts, the main operation of late 1702 would instead take place on the Rhine. Hoping to bring a relatively quick end to the war, Louis XIV devised of a three-pronged offensive. The Anglo-Dutch in Flanders and the Imperials in Italy were to be tied down in their respective regions, while a strong French army would punch through the Rhine and link up with the Bavarian army, then surrounded on all sides. After joining with the Bavarians, the combined armies would descend on the Austrian capital of Vienna, which had just endured its darkest days a little more than a decade ago in the siege of 1683. The seizure of the Dutch barrier forts was aided by the regional governor, Max Emanuel Wittelsbach, also the Elector of Bavaria. By aligning himself with the Sun King, he knowingly betrayed his allegiance to the Habsburg Emperor, Leopold I. His principal motive is revealed in a secret treaty with the Bourbon kings, If it should please God to bless his Electoral Highness's arms so far as to dethrone the Emperor, the two kings will employ all their power to place his Electoral Highness upon the imperial throne. Such an audacious plan will require the utmost cooperation, timing, and attention to detail. Operations began well on the Lower Rhine as the imperial circles very slowly rallied around the Emperor. Marshal Camille d'Euston, Comte de Tallard, rapidly occupied Nancy, capital of the neutral Duchy of Lorraine, before penetrating well past the Rhine, capturing Trier and Trarbach. In stark contrast, operations on the Upper Rhine proceeded at a snail's pace. After his defeat at the Battle of Chiari in 1701, the dispirited Marshal Catinat was sent to Alsace, swapping places with the Duke of Villars, accepting the command reluctantly. Encamped at Metz, the unnerved Catinat acted indecisively, as his opponent, the skilled imperial field marshal Ludwig Wilhelm, Margrave of Baden-Baden, swiftly opened the campaign. Known as the Shield of the Empire, Baden held more than a decade of independent military command under his belt, having campaigned both against the Turks and the French. His placement on the Upper Rhine was not random, as he had successfully defended it against previous French incursions in the 9 Years' War. As conflict loomed once more in 1701, he oversaw the construction of a strong defensive line known as the Lines of Stahlhofen, stretching from Stahlhofen itself to the western edge of the Black Forest. Before the eyes of Catinat, Baden boldly issued out to capture the key fortress of Landau. Baden, with an initial strength of 15,000, crossed the Rhine in May, leaving behind small garrisons to man the outposts and defensive works. His troops made short work of capturing Lauterburg and Wissembourg. By June 16th, his forces had invested Landau, with an artillery barrage commencing later on July 2nd. Louis XIV suggested Catinat make a diversionary attempt at the fortress of Kehl if Landau was attacked, but he refused to, even when ordered by the king himself. The Marshal, believing that Baden's army was superior to his own, instead evacuated his assembly area around Haguenau and took a defensive stance closer to Strasbourg. More importantly, his more than cautious approach left the Landau garrison defend for themselves, which, in vain, they doggedly would for 2 more months. Catinat spent such precious time pleading for additional troops from the king, and at last Louis relented. On August 13th, several thousand French reinforcements arrived at Saarbrücken, which Louis hoped would shake Catinat into action. Leading this new corps was Lieutenant General Claude Louis Hector, Comte de Villars. Villars had joined the French Royal Army as a teenager in 1670. At age 17, he was commissioned as a lieutenant of cavalry, where he started a lengthy reputation for personal bravery and taking initiative. By the age of 21, he had been wounded 4 times and had been commended by his commanders another 6. However, his knack for initiative sometimes meant disobeying direct orders, landing him in a place of suspicion within the conservative nature of the Royal Army. He led a controversial cavalry charge at Saint-Omer, which, although unauthorized, was very successful. Villars was not afraid to stand up for himself, even to the king. This made an impression on Louis, who, instead of responding with rage, cited the young officer's bold defiance as like that of a young officer who needed to be promoted. Villars' life up until 1702 was dominated by life on campaign. When France was in a time of peace, he temporarily went into the Habsburg service against the Turks, returning again to said service in 1697, just in time to take part in the decisive Battle of Zenta, serving under the future opponent Prince Eugene. In the 9 Years' War, he was promoted to brigadier general in the French army before finally achieving his current rank of lieutenant general. Villars was a loud critic of Catinat right off the bat, and insisted on an independent command. His wish came true on September 2nd, for he would be the man tasked with invading the Holy Roman Empire and linking up with Max Emanuel in Bavaria. Louis believed he was best suited to cooperate with the Elector, for Villars had represented his court in Bavaria during the 1680s and fought alongside him against the Ottomans. Time was of the essence. While Baden's smaller army was busy besieging Landau, the Franco-Bavarians needed to link up before winter set in. In September, the Elector dispatched a corps under the Comte d'Arco to seize Ulm, which fell within a few hours on the 8th. It was not a day later, however, when Landau finally capitulated. Leaving a small observation corps behind, the capable Baden now freely maneuvered southward. The return of an imperial army to his west frightened Max Emanuel, whose dispatches requesting immediate aid from the French were intercepted time and time again. Only a few weeks later, on September 28th, did one courier make it past the Rhine. Concerned for the security of his ally, Louis ordered Catinat to immediately cede more troops to Villars, who would in turn cross the Rhine somewhere at Hüningen. From there, Villars could avoid the difficult Black Forest. 6 days later, Villars arrived in the vicinity, expecting the Elector's army to make a diversion, which to his chagrin never came. Without the Bavarians, Villars would be forced to hasten the advance in the face of the enemy. For across the narrow bridge was Baden's army in possession of the high ground. The bridge at Hüningen was completed quickly by October 2nd, but without a Bavarian diversion on the other side of the Rhine, Villars would have to make his own. 21 miles north of Hüningen, another bridge was constructed, leading to the heights of Neuenberg am Rhein. When it was completed on October 11th, 2,000 French infantry surprised the 400-strong garrison, capturing the fort without a shot fired. When word of the castle's fall reached Baden, he was convinced the French were intending to cross in greater force at Neuenberg. Believing the troops at Hüningen were just for demonstration, Baden began to swing north with most of his army on the 13th. The ruse worked, and that night, Villars' men would prepare to move onto the plain. When French grenadiers dislodged the militia in the nearby outposts, Baden had been notified of the trick and was already hastily retracing his steps. Before all 16,500 French troops complete their crossing, Villars placed 2 lines of cavalry under de Magnac, about 4,500 strong, with the bulk of his artillery in their front. Observing them on the other side of the plain was the reforming ranks of Prince Hohenzollerns imperial cavalry, their guns also being brought before them. Baden's forces, after marching all night, were starting to arrive in force. Anchoring Baden's left flank was a powerful position, the Tübingen Heights, crowned by the forest of Gifhrenholz. Arriving around 10 a.m. at Eimeldingen, he placed the first line of several foot battalions under Count Karl Egon von Fürstenberg-Meschkirch at the edge of the timber on the crest, with 3 more protecting their right flank and overlooking the plain. Count Prosper von Fürstenberg-Stühlingen's Swabian foot was close behind. Hidden by the forest were 6 squadrons of the Bayreuth Dragoons and 2 grenadier battalions placed in reserve at Haltingen, which Baden then made his headquarters. Villars' plan was certainly a bold one. With the heights of Tübingen on his right, his left flank was covered by one other enemy strongpoint. On the defenses opposite Hüningen that morning, only Fort Friedlingen on the French right remained occupied by Imperial militia. Its garrison, along with the Imperial artillery on the plain, would steadily fire round shot into General de Magnac's French horse, who could do little to avoid it. Furthermore, if a charge was made and ended in a rout, the French could only have the narrow bridge at Hüningen and the river Wiese to their backs. Villars would need to dislodge the Imperial foot quickly and converge all 16 available grenadier companies to support the assault columns preparing to attack the Tübingen heights. Placing his headquarters at Weil, General de Bord led the 4 infantry brigades in 2 lines up the heights to the grape arbors and steep slopes, sword raids. Despite the entanglements, his infantry reached the crest, where they exchanged a warm fire with the enemy. De Bord's infantry initially faltered, having to attempt their assault twice more. Exhausted from their overnight march, the Franconians of Graf Egan's first line began to waver. At some point in the desperate combat, he was killed. Worse yet, the Franconian infantry had quickly burned through their ammunition. Following Egan's death, the Franconians surged to the rear, French bayonets at their backs. Pressing further into the forest, the Swabian foot of Count Prosper's second line became embroiled in the fight as the Franconians filed past them, only to reveal their pursuers just behind them. Combat in the woods quickly devolved into several smaller, sometimes hand-to-hand combats. Several Imperial battle flags were conquered, along with several field guns. At this point in the fighting, many officers on both sides had been killed or wounded, including the commanders of all the French infantry brigades. Such fighting had the effect of rendering the French foot disorder, leaving them dangerously exposed. As they cleared the woods, they resembled more a herd of sheep than an army. Baden seized the opportunity and threw in his reserves. The Bayreuth dragoons, now dismounted, pounced on the vulnerable groups of Frenchmen, shattering their right flank with a withering fire. The grenadiers and other rallied Imperial bayonets followed in the center. Once sure of a quick victory, Villars' grey-coated troops were shoved out of the forest and through Tübingen, before pouring down the heights back to where they started. The chain of command was shattered, de Bord having been killed in the counterattack. Villars, writing a premature victory letter to the king, was flabbergasted at the sight of the ranks fleeing down the slope. "Where is your courage? The battle's already won!" Villars shouted, caught up in the chaos. "Cry with me! Long live the king!" Thus began the arduous task of rallying the broken men. As the infantry assault turned to disaster, the Imperial batteries in the plain and Fort Friedlingen continued to batter de Magnac's lines, the only thing protecting the broken French infantry. Baden understood that he held the perfect opportunity: charge, break the enemy horse, and when they were out of the way, pursue the panicked foot to the Wiese and destroy the French army. Baden dispatched the order to the Prince Hohenzollern, commanding the first line of cavalry to crush the enemy. On the other end of the plain, de Magnac took notice of the thousands of flashing sabers, then starting toward him. Instead of charging right then and there, he chose to wait until the Imperials came before Friedlingen, so the artillery from the fort would cease fire to avoid hitting their comrades. When Hohenzollern came within 500 paces, de Magnac's troopers leapt forth. Contrary to typical French cavalry doctrine, they did not fire pistols before charging home with a saber. The effect was devastating and decisive. All the senior cavalry commanders in Baden's ranks were either killed or wounded, and the troopers soon fled to the Kanderbach stream as a mob. De Magnac ceased all pursuit just short of the defilade, not wanting to distract his regiments with plunder and pillaging, returning to his original position. Below the heights, Villars was finally able to somewhat rally the shattered foot. Seizing a regimental color in one hand and holding a pistol in the other, he once again led the ragged columns up the slope. By this time, the Imperial infantry had run out of ammunition and were as badly disorganized. They could do little to oppose the renewed attack, except withdraw. With his cavalry thoroughly beaten, his exhausted infantry out of ammo, and the chain of command in tatters, Baden had no choice but to order a retreat. The next day, Fort Friedlingen capitulated after enduring a scaling assault. As the smoke cleared and the groans of the wounded echoed across the hills, Villars consolidated his position as the beaten Baden retired to the safety of Freiburg. The cost of Villars' first victory was soon revealed. French records claim a loss of 1,152 killed and 2,389 wounded. Baden, who had never before been defeated, lost anywhere from 1,200 to 3,000 men from all causes, along with 33 precious standards and 10 to 12 field guns. It was certainly a close-run thing. Despite the costly nature of the battle, Villars earned the respect of his men. Whenever he would pass by the ranks, loud cheers sounded of "Long live the Marshal! Long live the Marshal!" He was then still Lieutenant General, but not for long. 5 days after the battle, he received his Marshal's baton, along with a letter of congratulations from the king. As October turned to November, temperatures plummeted, meaning the campaign season would soon come to a close. Worse yet for Villars, Max Emanuel was nowhere to be seen, even as a passage over the Rhine had been established. Even after pleas from King Louis himself were received and read, the elector wasted precious time, for reasons unknown, until late November, when he again curiously urged Villars to send troops to protect the Bavarian frontier. The weather had only worsened by then, so Villars firmly decided against such an endeavor. In December, his army retired to Metz for winter quarters. By New Year's of 1703, Villars had gone back to Versailles to his wife and newborn son. Friedlingen proved to be the first clear-cut French victory of the war. Whereas Vendôme achieved an impressive but still only partial success in Italy against the mighty Prince Eugen, Villars could boast of total victory, and against another one of Europe's famed Ottoman slayers no less. However, the war was not going ideally elsewhere, particularly in Flanders and northwestern Germany, as the Allies coalesced to contain the army of Boufflers and the Elector of Cologne. Among their leading captains was another rising star, who Villars would be destined to face several years later.